I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are formerly Velocities in Music.
That's right.
Formerly. That's a key word, Tom.
Yes.
That's a key word. Let's talk about formerly.
Okay.
First of all, Tom, what was Velocities in Music?
Velocities in Music, it was the channel, website, entity, call it what you will, that we ran for about 4.5 years, from early 2010 to mid 2014, I guess.
In 2014,
right?
buddy.
Jeez. About a year ago by now, almost exactly. I think we posted our last video in September 2014.
Our last recording session was in August 2014.
Right. That sounds right.
Yeah, and essentially, to me, Velocities in Music was a chance for us to come together and talk about music that we were listening to.
Right.
It started off, I remember you and I were at this local pizza place in Ames, Iowa called Jeff's Pizza. We were listening, and we had just listened to Muse's newest album in 2009, The Resistance.
Yes.
And we hated it.
Yep.
We hated it. Yet all these music critics out there loved The Resistance. And I think that always stuck with us. We were armed. We wanted to try out a new format of music reviews. At the time, it was very new, and that was video music reviews. And so we would film these things. We'd get together and, once it started off, we'd get a list of 10 albums, and then every 2 weeks we'd get together and do a 2-hour filming session. We'd film, continuous cuts,
right.
one solid cut. And we'd do each album review.
Changing shirts in between. Getting weird.
Super sweaty because we were always recording our makeshift studio
right,
was in this
yeah.
always an awful environment.
Just ghetto as hell.
Yeah.
You're right. We oftentimes couldn't have picked a worse environment to film in.
No, we really couldn't.
Yeah.
And it was, in basements, in unair conditioned upstairs bedrooms.
That's right.
In my shed at my house. And we would put up, fake walls, and it improved over time. We took the time to improve Velocities in Music. We were always working. I remember when we started. If you go back and watch some of our first episodes of Velocities in Music.
Don't make me do it.
Don't do it. It's painful. In fact,
is.
It's laughable how bad we were at this.
Right.
We turned a camera on and essentially just started talking about music for 30 minutes straight. How boring. Nobody, even our wives, wouldn't watch that. And no one did. But we sure had a hell of a lot of fun.
Right, we did, and that's what kept it going. And once we kind of settled into a format, started to improve things, really understand not only what we were doing, what we were trying to do, and where our shortcomings were, I think we were slowly able to improve it over time.
Yeah, we lost the lamp.
Yes.
We lost the lamp with glaring.
Filming
a lamp.
A lot of trial and error.
A lot of trial and error, right? And I think that one of the key improvements we made is we made the reviews a lot shorter. We took them down to about 6 to 10 minutes, somewhere in there. And I think that really fit our style. And I think, another thing that we did is as Velocities in Music went on, a couple years in, I remember in 2012, we shifted focus to where we were filming on a set day every week, and we started doing 4 albums a week, and it worked much better for us. And I feel like we got into this groove. It was about, for the next 2 years, we really followed that format. We had a backlog of reviews based on, viewer feedback and our own personal preview and our previews that we had done and our tastes. We picked 4 albums a week and went through them and reviewed them, and I feel like we created a really sustainable model.
Yeah.
So why did we stop?
Well, that kind of rhythm was really important.
Right, the cadence even.
And before I address your question of why did we stop, I want to take another step back real quick and just look even at how that cadence and that rhythm changed over time. Because it really was for a good reason, and it actually is what kept us going. And I got to say, being that was kind of your idea, I think that really kind of saved us in the long run and kept us going as long as we did. However, we were also, we decided to start this up at a time that really things were changing in our lives a lot. We started this while we were in college. And in college, you don't really have any kind of regular schedule. We kind of just got together and did this when we could anyway. But then, we transitioned into more of the working world. There was a while where you lived 40 minutes away from me and you'd have to drive up to my place to film. And then it was hard to schedule around that. And then we started, working at the same company, and it was like, okay, we need to pick a day, get together and do this. And so I'm glad that we were able to get that going as much as we can. But in terms of why did we end up stopping, I think that there are a lot of reasons. And it's as much, personal stuff with us, what was going on in our lives at the time, as much as it's just, that shed light on what I tend to think of as just some inherent flaws with what we were trying to do. I think that as what we were trying to accomplish became clearer and our goals became more objectified and solidified, really, then we just kind of realized it was a lot to bite off. You know?
I the fundamental reason we stopped, I think what the tipping point was, is travel. Both of our jobs evolved to the point where we were both required to travel. I have a kid. We both have wives. We both have houses now. 4.5 critical years of our personal development passed over the course of Velocities and Music's existence. And to adjust to that, I mean, to try to keep doing this over and over again every week, it got to be kind of a grind. It really did. And I think that for a long time, it was really us doing it for each other. Like the thing for me was seeing you every week and getting to talk about something we're both very passionate about with you every week.
It was a lot of fun. Good reason to hang out, just something that you can actually, something measurable you can actually get involved in.
Absolutely.
Like, that's a lot of fun. And the travel's a big part of it too, because I remember, I think what really was the nail in the coffin at the time, and just to go completely unfiltered here, I got nothing to hide. I think there was like 2 weeks in a row where 1 week I was out of town, and then the next week I was back in town and you were out of town. And then, I mentioned that getting into that weekly rhythm was really nice, and it kept us going for a long time. But then, the downside of that weekly rhythm is once you get just a couple cycles of that in a row that break from that schedule, then you're completely off course. It's so hard to get back on and be flexible about it.
We got completely off course.
Yeah, derailed.
And it almost, and I hate to say that was the reason, because let's be blunt, it wasn't the reason why we stopped Velocities and Music. We would have started again much sooner than a year later had we still been motivated to do it. But I think that there were some major assumptions that were in both of the back of our minds that we knew had to draw Velocities and Music to a close at some point. And one of those things was that video just wasn't our medium.
Yeah.
Neither of us feel confident in video editing.
No, that's absolutely true.
Now.
And that's something that our fans were very quick to point out. Our viewers were. And I actually really appreciate that. That's something I always loved about, our viewers' feedback is they're very honest about saying, look, guys, I know you're trying this, but it's not working. Yeah. And that's always really helpful.
Yeah. Now, the strength is that since there were two of us, we had to boil our reviews down to a certain time length. We really developed a good way of playing off one another, of keeping the conversation going and not allowing there to be any dead space. And hopefully, in this, recording, we can keep that going. And hopefully that's evidence of that. So there were strengths there, but just in general, we didn't have the video equipment or the knowledge to edit our videos in a way that made it fun to watch. We tried to keep them short and do one singular cut. And it just, in the end, it wasn't ever going to get us the results that we want.
Right.
You take that and you couple it with the grueling schedule.
Yeah.
Even reviewing 150, 200 new albums every single year, we didn't even scratch the surface of the total number of albums that came out.
And that's just a reality that we did not fully acknowledge or understand when we first started. We didn't know what the big picture looked like. But once you get into it, it's something that's very, you keep digging and you keep finding these bands all over the place. And I remember, a lot of stuff that ended up being our favorite stuff that we reviewed is not very well known, little heard acts that then ended up having a big impact on us.
Lost in the Trees.
Lost in the Trees, Have a Nice Life.
Baroness.
Absolutely. Bands like that, I'm finding, oh my gosh, there's so many great acts out there. But then you realize what the big picture was and see that you were just seeing the tip of the iceberg before. And it seems like kind of a futile thing to try and tackle. And one thing that's I think important to understand about both of us is that we don't like to do anything half-assed.
That's true.
I'm not willing to do something at all if I don't think that I can really give it the attention it deserves and give it its due. And I think it got to the point where it's not just that maybe we weren't motivated, but if there was a lack of motivation, it's because we finally truly understood what it would mean and what it would take to actually take that all the way to what we would consider doing the project justice.
Right. And to be honest, I think like the last year, I knew that my heart wasn't in it.
Yeah.
But the amount of fun that I had every week talking about music with you kept me going.
Absolutely.
And I think that we've missed that this past year. There's been so many times where I've wanted to talk about music with you, and now I know that like I'm coming to you, like now I'm doing a lot. The other thing is that I'm doing a lot of musical background soul searching, I guess.
Right.
I'm going through best of lists of best classic rock albums of the 1970s.
And I've been doing that a lot too. And actually, I've loved talking about that with you as we've both kind of been going through that process. And it makes you realize that, well, I think it's important to keep up with current music. I spent the last week or two catching up on some 2015 albums that I hadn't listened to. I still have my own little Google Doc that I'm keeping track of the albums I want to listen to. Once I get to listen to them, what I think of them, taking some quick notes, nothing too formal, and not every album I'm going to listen to 5 times like we did.
We're not
going to
go through 200 albums a year at that pace. Of course not.
But at the same time, it kind of made me realize that I think one thing we were missing with Velocities in music was the attention that some older albums deserve. Because while I love catching up with new albums, and I love doing the throwback episodes with you, that was a lot of fun, but it got to a point where it's like, there's still so much out there that's been going on, before now that I feel I need to catch up on.
Yeah, and that conflict where we would do throwback requests, and we would try to get these albums that were like quintessential classic albums that made an impact of music. We would try to review those. And I feel like those were some of our best reviews.
Yeah.
And we kept trying to fight this tension between reviewing the new records that were coming out and reviewing like the old classics and our fans' requests. And the fans' requests were just simply more rewarding.
Yeah.
And I think that also, lends itself to the conversation around philosophies in music, which was an idea we came up with early on that we never really embarked on. It never really worked. We were going to just sit around and talk about these topics in music, these subjects. And I think that leads us to where we sit today.
Right. And that's a great point, because really, you think back to when we started the philosophies in music stuff, and honestly, I don't even know if you can find that stuff online anymore. I don't know if it's posted anywhere. Maybe if you scrounge the depths of the internet, you'll find a few of those early
I'm sure
things.
It was terrible.
But, right. I think we only did, like 3 or 4 of them, and they were in the very early days. Like before we had probably even gotten to 100 album reviews. But the reason we didn't keep doing philosophies in music is because it was just too much to tackle that and album reviews.
It was grueling.
But we decided to make album reviews the focus, and now it's like, should we have?
And a big change in music has happened, and I think the last, 5-6 years since Velocities in music, the idea became a thing. And I don't think music reviews are nearly as utilized as they used to be in finding new music. Spotify and the digital revolution have taken music over.
Right.
The record companies are dying. It's only a matter of time at this point. And now what people are using to find new music is services like Spotify, services like, these pre-made playlists that are already out there, because music is literally at your fingertips. You don't have to purchase anything. You can just click a track and play a whole playlist of new music and then find what you like and listen to that artist. You don't really need a music reviewer giving their very pretentious opinions about music, and that was certainly something that Velocities in music, that always weighed on us, is that the more music we listen to, the less music we seem to fall in love with.
Yeah, and you make a good point. One thing I want to expand on that, the point that you made about the record companies, is that it is the old format of the purpose that they serve really is dying. But what's interesting is I still talk to a lot of people who look to record companies just to see, what bands are on their roster. They get to know a record company and say, I like the bands, the kind of music that this company has. But at that point, they're less of a standard record label, and it's more of just an almost informal endorsement.
An informal endorsement,
we put these guys on our website, say that they're under our umbrella, and then that way you'll check them out. But how many of those people that are checking them out are actually buying merchandise, are actually buying the music from them? Some of them are, but probably more aren't than are, and it's a very different relationship.
Yeah, and I just think that people, they aren't listening to music reviews or reading music reviews as much anymore. They aren't letting the music review base their decision on whether or not they should check something out. Now, that's probably not everybody, but I would say there's certainly been a shift away from it.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads us to the next question that we need to answer, Tom, which is, will Velocities in music continue?
Well, in short, I'd have to say no.
Why not?
For all the reasons we just said, really. It was just something that I think was a good run, but came to its close of, natural causes and things that we realized just simply weren't really sustainable and able to continue in its format. But obviously, we're here talking about this now, so something will take its place.
So I think that for all of the things that we just talked about, we have a plentitude of reasons why we should not continue Velocities in music, but we also have a number of reasons why we should continue talking about music with one another.
Right.
At least from the foundation that you and I both get a lot of joy out of it.
Yeah.
A very life-enriching activity. Plus, I think that, we're friends. We've been friends since, you were 12.
Yeah, if you say so. Yeah, sure. Okay.
But at the same time, like we want to continue. Now we almost need to build in reasons why we should hang out on a regular basis and talk about things that we care about. And I think music is certainly one of those things. And the past year has certainly proved that we really need this in our lives. So I think that being said, audio recording and audio production is something that you have a particular strength in as a recording artist.
Yeah.
And I think that lends itself very well to the podcast format.
Right. Mm-hmm. I've already got all the equipment.
We do already have all the equipment at our fingertips.
We're ready to go, yep.
So I think that going forward, I think the goal here is to establish the fact that we would like to start a podcast.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have a name for this podcast yet, or at least we're trying to come up with a name for it. We're looking for suggestions. So you listeners out there, if you have suggestions for what a Jake and Tom, formerly of Velocities in Music, podcast would be called, we would love to hear them, because, kind of what our idea is that we would get together a couple times a week and just talk about music and more in line of like the philosophies idea, not in the music review sort of vein. In what we talked about just a minute ago when we were saying, the album review isn't really where we want to be spending our time for various reasons, is why I think we're going to discontinue the album review format. We did that for 4.5 years. We crossed the 800 video album review threshold, and I think that puts pain to it,
Yeah.
Like I really feel like we beat the horse to death.
We really didn't quit early or anything. Like we gave it its go.
Yeah, and while there were a number of reviews in there that I thought were excellent, there were a number that I thought were subpar. And I think that, just the way that the two of us and that we talk with one another and the relationship and rapport we have with one another, and combining that with our strengths of just being able to produce an audio track much better than we can produce a video recording, I think will lend itself that we just naturally can do better at a podcast than we could the video album.
Right. It's also, another thing I want to point out is that you mentioned earlier with Velocities in Music album reviews, we really had to make a concerted effort to trim things down to digestible length, to an 5 to 10 minute album review, where really it's much more in our natural forte to just yammer on and on about crap for extended periods of time.
And the beautiful thing is while I've probably said a number of things I will regret saying later, we can cut all of them out.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's a huge advantage, I think, of the podcast, and
clean it up a little bit. Hopefully, give everyone something a little bit more polished and focused to listen to.
So, how we're going to start this podcast, yet to be named podcast, is I think we want to talk about. We have some really big subjects, these very vague subjects in music that we want to talk about. One of those is, what is the role that a music critic plays? In who's qualified to be a music reviewer? Some other different ideas is the difference, like what are the benefits and downsides to concerts and live albums, artists' personal lives, personalities, music that's ahead of its time. What's going on with the vinyl resurgence? Why is that taking place? A number of very widespread topics. But then I'd also, I think that the idea is that we'd also like to dive into some more specific topics. I think that one major change that I want to make an outright effort to make is that when talking about music, I know that throughout Velocities in Music, I always felt, Tom, that you were an expert and I was this novice. And I felt like
which was surprising to me.
I know that was surprising to you, but the more that we went through Velocities in Music, the more that I relied on you to tell the backstory of the albums. And the more I think you relied on me to play the role of host, kicking things off, doing the conclusion, things like that. And I feel like we really developed that. That was what I was talking about before when we had this rapport of how we just played off of one another. You were all about the content and I was all about the setup. And I really thought that format worked well. But first of all, I think that there are a lot of people out there who could just sit and listen to you talk about music all day long. And I know that you don't give yourself enough credit when it comes to just the amount of knowledge you have built up over time listening to I have never met somebody who has listened to more records than you, ever. And I'm sure there are people out there that have listened to more music than you, but it is a very short list.
I know that there are people out there that have. But that's that's kind of
but I'm sure
thing.
Even they would want to listen to you talk about music. So
I would want to talk to them
exactly, and maybe this will allow us a method of doing that,
right? And because it's all about that dialogue, and that's something that we talked about back in the Velocities in Music days all the time. Is it's about creating a dialogue.
So this has kind of been an epilogue to Velocities in Music. A year later, Tom and I, formerly of Velocities in Music, reflecting on the 4.5 years we spent doing video album reviews on our YouTube channel. And now going forward, we're looking at doing this podcast, this weekly podcast that is just going to be kind of very loosely formed. And I think that what we really want it to be is something that's adaptable. When we started Velocities in Music, our reviews were 30 minutes long. They had a lamp. We were filming a lamp. Whoever thought that was a good idea? I think that was my idea, and that was the worst idea, one of the worst ideas I've ever had, up there with the bowl cut back in the 90s. But I think that what we learned was that we have to adapt, and we're starting this podcast, and we feel like this is more closely aligned with our strengths as individuals and what we care about. We aren't going to be perfect at this.
Yeah,
we are going to produce many bad podcasts. In fact, probably our first podcast won't be that great. But I think that we will improve over time. We are going, as you said, you and I are the type of people, we don't like doing anything half-assed.
Yeah.
So we will find what is wrong and we will iterate and improve on it. And I think that moreover, the other thing we really want to do is listen to our listeners.
Yes.
Any feedback that we get from you guys out there listening somewhere, somehow, in some form or digital medium that you're consuming this podcast in, we want to hear from you. And you can send us an email at velocitiesinmusic.com until we get another email address.
Yeah.
Or our Facebook page. Send us a message there, or just find some way of contacting us. And we are going to listen to the feedback that you give us on these philosophy subjects that we're going to talk about.
Definitely, and that that goes for format, content. What are things that you'd like to hear us talk about? Because it can really be more general, broad topics. We're open to the ideas of really drilling into something specific if we think that there's enough to talk about. And it's that kind of freedom and that kind of more free-form conversation that I'm really looking forward to, as opposed to being confined to talking about one single album. For 5 to 10 minutes at a time, because it did get to feel confining over time.
Sure
you and I, as I'm sure any viewers or listeners found, we love to go on tangents and sidebars. It's fun, and to me, that's what music conversation is all about. Is finding that those parallels and those places where you can be talking about one thing and then jump into something that's related in some way, but gets you thinking about something a little bit different. And within the album arena, it's fun to do that. It's fun to really hyper focus on something, but it also is a little bit confining.
Yeah, and I think that going forward, the cool thing that we get to do is we've shed ourselves of the fetters of rules.
Yeah,
those don't exist anymore. We get to do whatever we want, and I think that we'll be better able to serve our listeners that way. Better, make the conversation about them instead of just about whatever album came out that week. Totally confining. We don't have that anymore.
Right. What's also great about it is we don't have to change shirts between everyone.
Oh, I just won't be wearing a shirt.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not right now.
Pants either.
That's a lie. But another thing, actually, that we didn't bring up is timeliness. we used to tend to film our album reviews like, you know, a week or two after the album came out, so we had adequate time to listen to it. And then if it was the last album of the set that we reviewed, we'd release it a week after. And I think we always had this like inevitable 2 to 3 week lag and when we were able to discuss an album from when it was released. And what I'm really hoping with this new format and this new style of content is that we can talk about more universal themes that really that don't have an expiration date on them. You know, things that people out there could talk about at any time that will be relevant, because let's face it, music's not dying, and these topics are things, you know, just different ways of thinking of it. Different ways of looking at music. And I think that that's something that right now a lot of general music conversation tends to be missing.
Right.
Just perspective, just looking at things differently.
Music isn't dying.
Right.
Elvis Costello was once famously quoted for saying, talking about music is like dancing about architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And that quote has stuck with me for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
I love talking about music.
Me too.
I think that there's a place for it in the world. I want to be alive in a world where people dance about architecture.
Right.
When they look at a building, say it's a Greek,
Colosseum,
yeah. a Greek,
Roman Colosseum.
The Roman Colosseum.
I'm mixing
Acropolis,
my eras up. Sorry.
Like just any piece of architecture and be inspired to dance. I feel like that is a world that I want to live in.
Right. It doesn't have to be a bad thing. We just have to reframe the way we think about it.
And I want to live in a world where people talk about music, where where they're so empowered and freed by music that they want to just talk about it all the time. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
Thanks for listening.